Good afternoon. This is Patrick in Washington with the Tri-Cities Insight, and I am with Delegate, how do you pronounce your name?
Lashresce.
Lashresce Aird, the incumbent in the 63rd District. The 63rd District covers Petersburg, Dinwiddie,
Prince
Hopewell.
George, Hopewell, and the southern tip of Chesterfield, Ettrick, and Matoka.
Yeah, that's good. The Democratic primary is coming up in 29 days on June the 13th. All of you that are in the 63rd District, make your voice known. Get out early in the morning. It starts at 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Now, Delegate Aird, before we get into it, happy belated Mother's Day.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
How was your Mother's Day?
My Mother's Day was amazing. Anytime I have an opportunity to spend time with my family, it's always pleasant, and that's my number one priority. So they made me feel really special.
That's good.
Thank you
That's
for
good.
asking.
Now, Delegate Aird, you were first elected in a special election back in
2015.
2015. The five-way primary. You got 46% of the vote. Now, you were elected one of the youngest members of the General Assembly.
Yes, that's
Now,
correct.
what would you say is some of your greatest accomplishments since being in the General Assembly?
Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for conducting this interview with me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with constituents and any others who might be listening. And I would say that one of my greatest accomplishments since being elected is having the opportunity to be appointed to meaningful committees that really speak to the priorities of my district. So in my first session, I was originally appointed to Health, Welfare, and Institutions, which speaks to healthcare concerns, as well as the Committee on General Laws and the Committee on Finance. I think those committees gave me a basis of getting reacquainted with the process, if you will, and trying to navigate how to make the most of those assignments for my district. And since then, having been appointed in this immediate past session, keeping health, welfare, and institutions, as well as general laws, but replacing finance with the appropriations committee. I think those committees are important because they really allow you to impact directly the policy that will impact not just my district, but the entire Commonwealth. And in that first session, I can talk about the funding we were able to secure for the Petersburg school systems, which was over $500,000, and talk about the legislation I was able to pass for the city and my other localities, and the same thing for this immediate past session. But let me know how far you want me to go into that question.
Well, can you go further now concerning the General Laws Committee? What was your progress on the General Laws Committee as being a freshman and not even a full freshman, a half
That's
freshman?
right. That's right. So that committee is sort of the one committee that is a catch-all. If it doesn't fit neatly into those other committees of concern, they usually send it to general laws. But in particular, a lot of discriminatory legislation goes through the General Laws Committee. And so I've been proud to cast votes against, at least in this past session, policy like the bathroom bill. We saw the immediate damage it did in a state immediately to our south, North Carolina, south of us, and the economic impact it had on communities and in the state. And you've had individuals in our legislature carry that same policy and try to impact whether or not people can of the same sex use certain bathrooms. So being able to speak out in that committee against that kind of legislation, as well as cast a vote against that kind of legislation, was pretty meaningful to me. And a lot of other legislation that goes through the General Laws Committee is really to make sure that bills go through so many changes from the subcommittee process through the committee process, heading to the floor, that you want to make sure you're not putting in changes that are harmful. So just really being at the table and being part of that conversation has been really meaningful.
Now, going with that, the bathroom bill that you would say wasn't necessarily a success down in North Carolina. Here in Virginia, they tried, Delegate Marshall tried
That's
to
right.
ram through a bathroom bill. Now, were you instrumental in the, let's say, the rejection of the bill? Or?
I won't take full credit for that, but because the process requires, when a bill is introduced, it requires it to go through subcommittee before it can get to full committee, and then before it gets to the floor, that bill actually comes through my subcommittee. So right then and there, I have the first effort at preventing that bill from going forward. So I won't say that I was solely instrumental, but myself, along with one other person on that subcommittee, did cast opposing votes. And so collectively, we were able to prevent that bill from moving forward.
So I would consider yourself, would you consider yourself socially progressive on certain issues, or?
What I try and do is I do consider myself socially progressive, but I also weigh the feedback that I receive from my constituents. And when there are hot button issues such as same-sex marriage or the bathroom bill, I can assure you in parts of my district like Dinwiddie County or in Prince George, I can get flooded with emails to say, we want you to vote like this. And so my staff, they keep a database of those responses, and I literally carry those with me to committee meetings before I make a decision.
Now, with Obergefell versus Hodges, it has already been decided for the entire nation, same-sex marriage. But here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, there are certain bills coming up in the General Assembly that has trying to pull that back.
That's exactly right. I think our legislature is still very much made up of representatives that are conservative, and representatives that are speaking to the needs of their constituents, in which they are opposed to those types of policies, those sorts of progressive policies. But just as they have a constituency to represent, so do I. And so sometimes there are those core ideological differences that you will solidly disagree on. Sometimes that's party based, sometimes that's district based, but for the most part, you find a way to come together on those much broader things. But there will always be those ideological differences where you are, I'm in my corner and you're in yours.
Yes. Now, the Appropriations Committee.
Yes.
Now, what were your progress on that committee?
So for me, if you know anything about the legislature, you know that it has a lot to do with seniority. It has a lot to do with your relationships with the party that's in power, because each committee is made up of a number of
Proportionate to,
yes, that's right.
And Republicans in the General Assembly, 65 to 35, right?
64 to 60, we have 34 Dems, so yes. And so to get on that committee as still a semi-freshman is not the norm. And so I don't try to say that being on the Appropriations Committee is everything, but it sure is helpful, because when it's time to have a conversation about the needs for your district and to be in those smaller meetings where you're going line by line through the budget, and you need them to understand the significance of the request that you're making, being at the table makes all of the difference. So in my first session, being able to get the money for Petersburg school systems, that was amazing. And I was able to have those conversations because having been staff in the General Assembly, I knew some of those same individuals that was already in power and on that committee. But even when you think about this past year being actually on the committee, I learned so much more about the sausage making process I couldn't even imagine. So you have your full committees, then you have your subcommittees, but then there are even task force. And those task force are really where the real work is done. And if you're not in the room, you can be left behind so quickly. But if you have someone either at the table, or in my case, being at the table, that allows me to ensure that I can advocate directly with the person, the people who are making the decision, and see it through to fruition. And so that's why I'm so proud to say, yes, I did get $500,000 for not just Petersburg school system, but for the school system in Hopewell. And that's why I'm proud to say, yes, I did get $500,000 for the city specifically, so that we can help strengthen our finances, and so that we can help strengthen the foundation as we move forward and address our challenges, because it's not an easy thing to do, and it could have very easily not been that way.
So I would guess that you have a good working relationship with the delegate across the bridge.
Absolutely. I feel like people are people first, and that's how I look at not only our regional representation of the other legislators in this region, but the other party. Again, you have to be able to have a strong relationship with the people who are in seniority, the people who are chairs of committees, because that's how you get it done. If you are throwing bombs at the other side because you disagree with them, they will immediately be turned off, and you make no progress for the Commonwealth or for the district that you represent. And so it's because I've built relationships with people versus as a party, or as someone who doesn't agree with me, then I've been able to talk with them, express what the needs are for the cities that I represent and the counties that I represent, and they will actually listen and hear me out and show me how we can work together to make things happen.
Now, I do understand that completely. Now, certain people in your party, because of your relationship with people across the aisle, they have. How would you respond to people that will call you like a dino?
Well, I feel like that's a really unfair characterization, because my history is, even as a college student, I was working on Democratic campaigns to get Democrats elected. Even to this day, I've risen to leadership in every Democratic organization that I've been a part of. So if you talk about specifically in Petersburg, I started out as just a member. Then I rose to being secretary, chair of the bylaws committee, all these things. And now I'm chair of the Petersburg Democratic Committee. And if you look at our state party, the Virginia Democratic Party of Virginia, I've been on the Central Committee since I was just a staff member, and that's been over 5 or 6, 7 years. And now I'm chair of the 4th Congressional District Committee myself. So I don't think you get any more Democratic than that. I think working to make progress for your district and working to be an effective legislator doesn't mean you have to compromise your democratic principles, because in every vote that I've taken, it's representative of my district. And for every decision that I make, it's not ever going to just be, oh, this is a democratic principle, so I have to vote this way. It comes with great thought and great assessment in trying to make sure that, yes, I'm adhering to my ideological principles, but I'm also representing my district. So just the quickest example I can think of is I hear often discussion about my votes on my budget amendment votes. And so what people don't understand is, if you want to maybe suggest that I voted against the governor, let's talk about the governor endorsing me. Let's talk about the fact that Congressman McEachin has endorsed me. U.S. Senator Tim Kaine has endorsed me. I can go on, but these are Democrats. And they would not do that if I was anything like a dino, or if I was opposed to the things that they stand for, and I share in standing with them in those things.
So even with that, you are willing to sometimes buck the Democratic Party line.
It is important to represent my district first, party second. That is the ultimate goal. I'm going to try and get as much as I can from my district, especially with the great needs that we have right now. That is my number one priority.
Now, back in April, you were just assigned to the Joint Subcommittee for
Local fiscal distress for local
Yes.
government, yes.
And concerning Petersburg. Now, on the committee, on the Joint Subcommittee, how were you able to benefit the city of Petersburg, which all the city of Petersburg reside in the 63rd district?
So thank you so much for that question. And I was appointed in April, but our first meeting won't be until July 1st. Because that's when all new committee assignments and all new policies go into effect. And so on that committee, though, I will say I'm going to enjoy having the opportunity looking at the different monitors we can put in place, not just for the city of Petersburg specifically, but you'll be surprised to know that there are a number of other localities in the state right now that are right there at that tipping point of being in that same bucket of local fiscal distress. And so we're looking at monitors that can be put in place. We're looking at whether or not the authority should be expanded at the state level regarding what actions they can and cannot take. Because what we found through this experience is that the state was extremely limited in how far they could go in actually being in the locality and implementing changes and making certain actions. And so
You actually proposed a bill in this session, I believe, concerning the city charter. Is that right?
yes, that is correct. And so that request came on behalf of the special task force that was put together by the city of Petersburg. And that task force identified several changes within the charter. And a lot of it was technical in nature, as well as addressing antiquated language. And we made those changes that they made specifically. I understand that possibly additional reviews of the charter will be ongoing. And so as those changes or those requests are made, then we'll continue to put those in.
Now, there is a movement in Petersburg to change the actual way that Petersburg elects their mayor. Now, before they can do anything, they have to have it run through the General Assembly. Would you support the change?
Well, they actually have to first pass it at their council level and or referendum, or if I'm correct, I know it's one of those, and then it comes to the General Assembly to be finalized. And again, if that is what my constituents have gone through the process of saying they want, then I absolutely will carry it.
Yes. Now, concerning Medicaid expansion, now that has been a big battle for the last couple of years. What is your views concerning Medicaid expansion?
I'm an advocate for Medicaid expansion, not just because of the impact it has on healthcare. If you know anything about my district, whether you're in Petersburg or Hopewell, the data shows that we have a lot of work to do to improve the health care needs and improve the health of our citizens district-wide. And I know for a fact by looking at the numbers that Medicaid expansion would have a significant positive impact. And if you look at the states that have expanded Medicare, it has had a tremendous economic impact in those states as well. And it's just something that is not only the right thing to do socially, but if you think about from a money perspective, it's very necessary.
Now, is there a possibility that Medicaid expansion will come through next year?
I have to say that our governor, Terry McAuliffe, has tried every single way he can to make Medicare expansion possible. And as you know, he's governor until December. And unless Ralph Northam continues his efforts, I'm assuming Ralph Northam, I'm a little biased there, but assuming the next governor continues to pursue Medicare expansion, that is the only way. Right now, I would say that is another one of those ideological differences amongst the Virginia General Assembly. And I don't want to make it partisan, but there's no denying that it is. And so you have a body that's ruled by the opposite party, and they don't want to see Medicaid expansion happen, Medicare expansion. And so with that, there comes a significant challenge in moving that through. And, you know, some fascinating things are happening at the national level that we can't ignore, and that has a significant impact on the state level as well. So as that's making its way through the process, who knows what will be in place by the time we get to January 2018.
So, on top of that, now with Medicaid expansion in, let's say, more, well, let's go here. Let's talk about the Atlantic Pipeline. Do you support the Atlantic Pipeline?
For me, I feel like if it's going to happen, I want to make sure that it happens in the safest way as possible. But I don't think that at the state level we control whether or not it happens or not.
Very good answer. Now, if you get the second term, the full term into the General Assembly, what will be your number one objective?
It's education. All the way, because from the moment I was knocking on doors back in March of 2015 up until this exact moment, there is no part of my district that I can go in where education is not the most important issue. And to be quite frank, if you look at concentrated poverty, and in any area of the country where there is concentrated poverty, I believe that education is the number one component to move the dial, to improve a community, to help citizens have the tools they need to improve their quality of life, and to make sure we are bringing up children to have the best chances at success. It all goes back to education. So I keep saying I was so proud of the work we did during my first session in getting the funding to have a new superintendent here. And he has made tremendous milestones just in a short period of time. But we can't leave it at that. There is still a lot more work to be done. There's still a lot more resources that are needed. And that's all the way from K-12 all the way through to just training for everyday people onto higher ed.
Now, education is very important. Now, have you, or are there any bills in the General Assembly now or in the last session that you co-sponsored that?
Several bills that I co-sponsored. And I think it's important for people to know the difference between patroning legislation, chief co-patroning legislation, and co-patroning legislation, because there are three categories. So patroning is something, I have this grand idea and I'm going to ask someone to draft it and I'm going to carry it. Chief co-patroning is I am an equal carrier on a piece of legislation, and co-patroning is signing my name onto that bill in support of my district. So I signed on to several education bills that were K-12 related, several workforce development education bills regarding like licensure standards and CTE credits, career and technical education CTE, and especially those bills that get at the school to prison pipeline. So yes, I did sign on to several education bills as a co-patron.
Now, you're running against Mrs. Rawlinson, who, this is a rematch. Now, what would you say is the different vision between you as delegate and as Mrs. Rawlinson?
Well, I would say that for me, two things. The first thing that I've learned in just one term, and that there's three angles you take in this position, and policy only does so much of it. The other is definitely from a community perspective. And for me, I feel like I have not just said what I was going to do, but I have done it. And I think that's the biggest difference. I think anyone can come before you and say anything to make you feel good, say anything to whoever, depending on the audience, and talk about what you want to do. But the difference is I have said what I want to do and have gone and done it.
Now, concerning mass incarceration, which, because Attorney General Sessions is about to ask the federal prosecutors to call for stiffer sentences. How would you address mass incarceration, which negatively impact the 63rd?
Absolutely. So there's two reasons for that. I am really deeply worried about an effort to go back to this period of time where you have strong sentencing guidelines being utilized, because first of all, our community has been already disproportionately impacted. And if you think about what's happening in Virginia right now with the school to prison pipeline, which means you have younger people being introduced into the prison, the law enforcement, and being given charges sooner rather than later, this could impact their lives sooner than it really should. And there are certainly so many ways, and data shows this, to prevent that from the very beginning. Secondly, you already have enough people in the community that have tried to make a better quality of life, maybe made a mistake in the past and are trying to improve, has been recovered and rehabilitated. And to say, if someone gets in trouble, you want to ensure that there's now a stiffer penalty when it's shown that people can turn their lives around. That's taking away real opportunity for our families and for our people. And so, one of the bills I did carry this session was relative to background checks, because we have found that you can't even get your foot in the door if you have had a mistake that you've made in the past. So if you meet all the knowledge, skills, and abilities and criteria for a position, and they want to offer you a job, you're cut off at the knees if you can't even get offered because of your background, especially if they're an organization that would be willing to work with you either way. And so I certainly feel like we have to be vigilant in our policies to prevent students from being, young people from being engaged with the law enforcement side of things at an early age. And we want to make sure that they have the really community support that they need to prevent them from making those mistakes along the way.
Now, this week is National Police Week, and there has been animosity between the minority community and police, of course. As a delegate, what have you done, or what will you do to address or bring police in the minority community together to reduce the animosity?
So I think that's one of those aspects that I was talking about when I said there's two parts of this job. There is the state policy level, but then there is the community level. And so state policy only goes so far. So from a policy perspective, I will say that one of the things that I was extremely proud of is to co-patron a bill this past session that actually will now implement in your driver's ed class actual measures you should take when interacting with police. So one of the funny things during the session,
and that received bipartisan support.
Absolutely. That actually went through my general laws committee. And so one of the things that happened is the original patron, Delegate Jawan Ward, talked about the fact that if you Google what to do when you get pulled over, you get all types of examples, some right, some wrong, but nowhere does it say, here is how you should engage with an officer when you come in contact with them. So from a state policy perspective, that is a law that I think will have a very positive impact, and just trying to understand what you think is common sense, but is not always the case, especially if you haven't been exposed to what is right before. From the community perspective, I'm really excited that in my district we've been pretty much without incident, and that our officers, and not just Petersburg, but in Hopewell and in all of the localities that I've been in that are in my district, are being really proactive about community policing, what that looks like, what that feels like, and wanting to, at least in Petersburg, from what I can tell from the community police summit that occurred back in February, talk about how do we bring people from in the community to be part of our police force, because they know the community, they grew up here, they can be a positive representation. And so I have certainly tried in as many ways that I can to stay engaged in what actions they have planned and that they're taking, and to be a support and resource where I can.
That is good. That is good. That sounds good. Now, concerning medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, yeah, I know that's a big question. The bill just came through this session. What? What?
I'm so glad you asked. What I would say is, in my opinion, especially because I am bearing witness at this moment in time to a constituent of mine who is dealing with the severity of cancer and watching someone very close to her suffer and deal with intense pain. The data has shown that access to medical marijuana has been life-changing. It has been positive for families and has made the difference in treatments. And I believe that if this is going to be another resource in the medical community for treatment of cancers that really can have such a devastating impact to a person, then I would support that.
Now, let's take this a little bit farther. Recreational marijuana. What would be Delegate Aird's view on recreational marijuana? Should we legalize marijuana or decriminalize marijuana in the Commonwealth of Virginia?
I believe that we are in a place where conversations should continue to occur around decriminalizing marijuana and ensuring that if the Commonwealth moves in this direction, that we have the necessary resources in place, that we are going about it in a very safe way and in ways that allow people obviously the opportunity to make their own decisions without having a negative impact on their livelihoods.
Wonderful. Now, I want to ask you one last question. Now, concerning the election coming up June the 13th, do you see, how is your reception? Is there a lot of apathy in the 63rd district concerning this election? And if there is a lot of apathy, how do we get people more enthused and more engaged in the community about, let's not just say politics, but engage in government?
Well, I would answer that question in two ways, just because I feel like not just in the 63rd district, but certainly we're not separate, but in the Commonwealth and around the country, there's been a great deal of voter apathy. And I think that's because if you think about the level of trust that people have in their elected officials and in, if you will, the sausage making of the process, they feel like, are their voices really being heard? And they're not seeing the changes that they would like to see because families are hurting. People are suffering. And when you are in that position and you don't see your quality of life improving and you don't see the changes that you've been told are happening fast enough, you lose trust in the process and you lose trust in the people who are coming to you to say that they're working towards these things on your behalf. And so the only way you eliminate that is through progress. If you don't trust that I'm going to do what I'm going to say, why would you want to participate in that process? And if as an elected leader, you don't come to where I am, you expect me to just be fully engaged into politics and to everything that's going on, but I don't meet you where you are, then you don't want to participate in that process. And so I feel strongly that some of the things that I do, like doing surveys and sending end of session letters and periodic newsletters, that is one way to get my information out there about building that trust and what I'm trying to do to make sure you know I'm representing you on in the best ways I can. But I still have a responsibility to go to where you are if you're not getting that information, to show you how I am working on your behalf. And so I think it goes back to that level of trust. I think that is linked with the apathy, and it speaks to the work as leaders, me all the way down to any other elected official, that we have to be committed to in order to keep people engaged in the process. And I'll also add that in Petersburg, I think there's a great deal of energy around being involved in the process and really paying attention to what's going on and to our leaders. And I love that, because if you think about anybody who is an employee, you have a job, you're given criteria to say, here's what your job is. And when it's time for your evaluation, if you've done every single one of those things that is on that list for your job, then that means you either get promoted or you keep that job. And so when you have voters that are engaged and they are now part of the process, it allows them to know exactly what's being done on their behalf, and if it's not, to demand more. And so I love that.
Now, do you think the financial crisis in Petersburg actually turned people off, especially Petersburg voters, off to the entire process?
I think that it did the exact reverse. I think that that is what is engaging people, because when you start to feel it in your pocket, when you start to feel it in your home, you want to know what's going on. And so I feel like that has caused citizens to take a second look at what they were being told. So before, you can come and sell me a bouquet of flowers and tell me everything is wonderful and the flowers smell great and they look great and they're growing wonderfully. But for some reason, my rose is dead. And now you're wondering, well, maybe this isn't what I thought it was or what you said that it was, and I'm taking a look for myself. And I think that's what's happening, and I think that's invaluable, because it's holding, it keeps the process true.
Now, as delegate, and as I said before, Petersburg is the hubbub of the 63rd district. When the financial crisis happened, what were you thinking when all of this happened?
I just have to be honest and very candid and say, I couldn't choose to be delegate at a more perfect time. In all honesty, I'm not someone who's going to say I have all the answers. And my philosophy is I go to the experts. I am not all knowing, but I guarantee you I'm going to do my homework and do my research so that when I'm making decisions, I, number one, know what I'm talking about and have the information to consider. So when all of this began happening, I looked around the state to try and figure out, is there any precedent for this? What have other localities done? And I talked to, we have what's called the Division of Legislative Services at the General Assembly, and those are the group of lawyers that typically drafts our legislation or does the research. And I had them doing research for me to send to say, what can we do and what can't we do to take action and to try and find a solution for what's happening as fast as we can. In addition to that, I reached out to the chairs of the money committees to say, are we allowed to do this? Can we do that? Is there any flexibility? Because there was such an immediacy to address what was going on. And so I learned more about local government fiscal distress in the last 6 months than I ever thought there would be a need to, but it has really strengthened my ability to not just advocate for the city as we're moving forward, but really for the Commonwealth to ensure that we remain financially sound, because there are so many localities that are just tinkering on the edge of being in the same circumstances.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Delegate Aird, we do appreciate you sitting down with us in your office. It's like a hotbed right here.
Oh.
We're going to wish you all the best. Tri-Cities Insight is totally neutral, so we wish you and Mrs. Rawlinson all the best. Is there anything else you would like to say before we end the interview?
Yes, Patrick, I just want to first and foremost thank you again for the opportunity to talk with both you and Trey. And I would just say that I'm very proud of being the representative for the 63rd District and for the accomplishments that I've been able to make on behalf of the district by way of education as well as workforce development. Again, I think that in every corner of the 63rd District, families have shared with me their concerns and talked with me about the different challenges that they deal with in their homes and as a community. And I have really carried that with me in every decision that I've made. I think from my time as a staff person onward to being the elected official, I've really been able to get the experience to be an effective legislator. And there is no time more than now, with the challenges that we deal with as a district, that experience is necessary to ensure that we continue to move forward and progress versus starting over and trying to take the time to figure out what that path looks like. I think I've laid a really solid foundation, and that there is a great opportunity to build upon that. I believe that my door is always open. There has never been a time where a constituent has reached out to me to ask a question or to get clarity on any of my positions, and I have not addressed them. And so I encourage your listeners to do just that and continuing to reach out to me. And if I can put in a shameless plug, if there's anyone who wants to know what I'm up to, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to balance off the formalities of state policy and the legislature with who I am as just a person, a mom, and a community grassroots advocate. And so thank you so much again.
Again, thank you, Delegate Aird. June the 13th, 2017 is the primary. The polls open at 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Y'all have a beautiful day.